In a quiet little village surrounded by lush green fields and winding rivers, life moved at its own gentle pace. The villagers woke up with the sun, worked hard during the day, and gathered under starlit skies to share stories in the evenings. Among them lived a young woman named Miss Tutieu, whose smile lit up even the darkest corners of their small community. She was known for her kindness, always willing to lend a helping hand or offer comforting words when someone needed it most. Miss Tutieu's family wasn't rich, but they had enough food on the table, enough love in their hearts, and enough dreams to keep them hopeful about the future. Her parents often spoke proudly of how she excelled in school, earning top marks despite having to walk miles each day just to attend classes. Now that she was older, Miss Tutieu had set her sights on something bigger, going to the city to study further. It was an ambitious dream for someone from such a humble background, but no one doubted her determination. One evening, after spending hours studying with a friend who lived nearby, Mr. parted ways with a warm goodbye. The air smelled of rain, and the sky was painted in shades of orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. As she walked home along the familiar dirt path, humming softly to herself, she never imagined this would be the last time she'd see her peaceful village for a long while. It happened so suddenly that she barely had time to react. A van screeched to a halt beside her, and before she could scream, rough hands pulled her inside. The door slammed shut, and darkness swallowed her whole. Panic surged through her veins as she struggled against her captors, but they were too strong. One of them pressed a cloth soaked in something sharp-smelling over her face, and within moments her world faded into nothingness. When news of her disappearance spread, the entire village erupted in chaos. Her family searched frantically, calling out her name until their voices grew hoarse. Neighbors joined in, combing every corner of the area, but there was no trace of her. Days turned into nights, and hope began to dwindle. Whispers started circulating about a notorious gang operating not far from the village. This gang was infamous for preying on young women, snatching them away and selling them into lives of unimaginable suffering. Every villager knew the stories, but hearing them now felt different because this time it wasn't some distant tale. It hit painfully close to home. Meanwhile, deep in the dense jungle far from the village, Miss Tutieu slowly regained consciousness. Her head throbbed, and her body ached as if she'd been tossed around like a rag doll. Blinking against the dim light filtering through cracks in the wooden walls, she realized she was locked in a tiny, suffocating room. Fear clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Think," she whispered to herself. "You have to think." Her captors weren't shy about letting her know what awaited her. They taunted her mercilessly, making cruel jokes about the fate they had planned. Each word they spat at her felt like a knife twisting deeper into her soul. But amidst the terror, something inside her refused to break. She thought of her parents, her siblings, her friends, all the people who loved her and believed in her. And she made a silent promise to herself. No matter what, she would find a way back to them. Days blurred together in captivity, each one more grueling than the last. The gang kept her isolated, feeding her just enough to keep her alive, but not enough to give her strength. They guarded her constantly, watching her every move like hawks. Yet, Miss Tutieu used this time to observe everything around her. She noticed patterns, the way the guards changed shifts, the sound of vehicles coming and going, the layout of the makeshift camp where she was held. These details might seem insignificant to others, but to her, they were lifelines. Every scrap of information was another step toward freedom. During one particularly brutal interrogation, she met another girl who had also been taken by the gang. The girl, younger than her, looked broken and defeated. Seeing her reminded Miss Tutieu of why she couldn't give up, not just for herself, but for all the others trapped in this nightmare. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out to the girl, offering words of encouragement. At first, the girl barely responded, but over time, trust began to form between them. Together, they became a team, silently supporting each other and sharing bits of hope in a place devoid of it. As weeks passed, Miss Tutieu's resolve only grew stronger. She knew escape wouldn't be easy, not with armed men surrounding her and miles of thick jungle standing between her and safety. But she also knew staying meant accepting a fate worse than death, so she started planning. She collected anything. She could use a shard of broken glass here, a piece of string there. She practiced loosening ropes tied around her wrists when no one was looking. She memorized the sounds of the jungle beyond the camp, imagining the freedom waiting on the other side. Her chance came sooner than expected. One night, the gang celebrated a successful deal, drinking heavily and letting their guard down. Only one man remained sober enough to stand watch, and he seemed distracted, his attention drifting elsewhere. Miss Tutieu exchanged a glance with the other girl. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. With trembling hands and pounding hearts, they put their plan into action. The tension in the air was palpable as they crept toward the guard, moving silently like shadows. When the moment was right, Miss Tutieu struck, using the makeshift weapon she'd prepared earlier. The guard stumbled backward, caught off guard, and the two girls bolted into the jungle. Their legs burned as they ran, dodging trees and leaping over roots. Behind them, shouts erupted, followed by the crack of gunfire echoing through the night. Adrenaline pushed them forward, driving them deeper into the wilderness. They didn't stop running until their bodies gave out. Collapsing near a riverbank, gasping for breath, they clung to each other, unsure if they were truly free or still in danger. The jungle loomed around them, vast and unforgiving, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they dared to believe they might actually survive. This marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, pain, and struggle, but also with resilience and hope. Little did Miss Tutieu know that her journey was far from over, and the battles she fought would inspire countless others to rise above their own hardships. For now, though, she allowed herself a brief moment of relief, listening to the soothing rush of the river and praying that help was somewhere nearby. The jungle was alive with sounds, chirping crickets, rustling leaves, and the distant call of birds waking up to greet the dawn. Miss Tutieu lay on the damp ground by the riverbank, her body aching from the frantic escape the night before. Every muscle screamed in protest, and her lungs still burned from running for what felt like hours. But none of that mattered compared to the relief washing over her. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't surrounded by walls or guarded by menacing eyes. She was free, or at least closer to it than she had been. Her companion, the younger girl who had fled with her, sat silently nearby, hugging her knees to her chest. Her wide, fearful eyes darted around as if expecting their captors to appear out of nowhere. Miss Tutieu reached out gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're safe for now," she whispered, though even she didn't fully believe it. The jungle was vast and unpredictable, but it was better than the hell they'd left behind. As the sun rose higher, its golden rays piercing through the thick canopy above, hunger and thirst began to gnaw at them. Their stomachs growled loudly, a reminder that they hadn't eaten properly in days. Miss Tutieu scanned the area, searching for anything edible. She remembered stories her grandmother used to tell about wild fruits and plants growing near rivers. Slowly, she got up, ignoring the sharp pain shooting through her legs, and started looking around. After some time, she found a cluster of small berries hanging low on a bush. They looked familiar enough, but she hesitated, recalling warnings about poisonous plants. "Do you recognize these?" she asked the other girl, holding up a handful of the berries. The girl shook her head weakly, too exhausted to think clearly. Miss Tutieu sighed and decided to take a risk. If they didn't eat something soon, starvation would do more harm than any potential poison. She popped one berry into her mouth cautiously, chewing slowly. When no immediate ill effects followed, she shared the rest with the girl. It wasn't much, but it gave them just enough energy to keep going. By midday, the heat became unbearable. Sweat dripped down their faces as they trudged along the riverbank, hoping it would lead them to civilization. But the jungle seemed endless, stretching far beyond what they could see. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back, and doubt began creeping into their minds. What if they were walking in circles? What if the gang was still chasing them? These thoughts weighed heavily on both of them. But Miss Tutieu refused to let despair take over. "We'll make it," she said firmly, more to convince herself than the other girl. "We have to—" Hours later, just when they thought they couldn't go on any longer, they heard voices in the distance. At first, they froze, afraid it might be their captors tracking them down. But then they noticed the tone of the voices, calm, friendly, and not threatening at all. Gathering their last ounce of strength, they stumbled toward the sound. Through the dense foliage, they spotted a group of villagers gathered near the water, filling containers and chatting casually. For a moment, neither of them moved. They stood there, hidden behind the trees, unsure whether to trust these strangers. Finally, Mr. parted the branches and stepped forward, her hands raised slightly in surrender. "Please," she croaked, her voice hoarse from lack of use. "Help us." The villagers turned to look at her, their expressions shifting from surprise to concern. One elderly man rushed forward, wrapping a blanket around her trembling shoulders. Another woman quickly offered water, which Miss Tutieu gulped down greedily before passing it to the younger girl. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain what had happened, but words failed her. All she could manage were broken sentences about being taken, held captive, and escaping into the jungle. The villagers listened intently, their faces darkening with anger and sadness. They knew exactly who she was talking about, the notorious gang that had terrorized the region for years. Without wasting another second, they helped the two girls onto a cart pulled by an ox and began the journey back to their village. Along the way, they reassured them repeatedly, "You're safe now. No one will hurt you here." When they arrived at the village, news of their arrival spread quickly. People came out of their homes, gathering around to catch a glimpse of the brave survivors. Word traveled fast, reaching local authorities within hours. Police officers arrived shortly after, asking questions and documenting every detail of their ordeal. Miss Tutieu recounted everything she could remember: the layout of the camp, the faces of her captors, the vehicles they used. Her memory was sharp, honed by days of careful observation during her captivity. This information proved invaluable, leading to a massive operation aimed at dismantling the gang once and for all. But even as the wheels of justice began turning, Miss Tutieu's physical and emotional wounds demanded attention. She and the younger girl were taken to a nearby hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to treat their injuries. Bruises covered their bodies, and malnutrition had left them frail and weak. Yet, despite the toll their ordeal had taken, there was a spark of determination in Miss Tutieu's eyes, a fire that refused to be extinguished. During her recovery, she received visits from family members who had been searching frantically for her ever since her disappearance. Their reunion was bittersweet. Tears flowed freely as they hugged each other tightly, vowing never to let go again. Her parents told her how the entire village had mobilized to find her, organizing search parties and praying day and night for her safe return. Hearing this filled her with gratitude, but it also deepened her resolve. She realized how many lives were affected by crimes like the ones committed against her, and she knew she couldn't simply move on without doing something to help others. As the days passed, Miss Tutieu grew stronger, both physically and mentally. With the support of counselors and survivor groups, she began processing the trauma she had endured. Talking about it wasn't easy. There were moments when memories overwhelmed her, leaving her shaken, but she pushed through, determined to heal. The younger girl, who had become like a sister to her, followed her example, slowly finding her footing again. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Miss Tutieu turned to her and said softly, "We survived. That means we're stronger than they ever were?" The younger girl nodded, a small smile breaking through her usual silence. In that moment, they both understood that while the scars of their past might never fade completely, they had the power to shape their future. Miss Tutieu's story became a beacon of hope for others trapped in similar situations. Local newspapers picked up her tale, highlighting her bravery and resilience. Soon, people from neighboring villages and towns started reaching out, sharing their own experiences and seeking advice. Miss Tutieu realized that her survival wasn't just a personal victory, it was an opportunity to create change. And so, Even as she continued to heal, she began dreaming of ways to turn her pain into purpose. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would inspire countless others and challenge the very systems that allowed such atrocities to happen. For now, though, she focused on taking one step at a time, grateful for every breath and every heartbeat. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it one day, one decision, one act of courage at a time. Miss Tutieu's recovery wasn't just about healing her body. It was also about finding a way to reclaim her life. The days in the hospital blurred together, filled with doctor visits, therapy sessions, and moments of quiet reflection. Her family stayed by her side, their love unwavering, but she could see the pain etched on their faces too. They had suffered alongside her, imagining the worst while she was gone. Now that she was back, they tried to focus on gratitude, but the shadow of what had happened lingered over them all. During one of her counseling sessions, Miss Tutieu found herself opening up more than ever before. The counselor, a kind woman with gentle eyes, encouraged her to talk about not only the trauma, but also her hopes for the future. At first, Miss Tutieu hesitated. How could she even think about moving forward after everything she'd been through? But as she spoke, something shifted inside her. She realized that survival wasn't just about escaping danger, it was about building a life worth living. And deep down, she still carried dreams she refused to let die. One evening as she sat in the hospital garden, she watched children playing nearby. Their laughter echoed softly in the cool air, reminding her of simpler times when joy came easily. A thought struck her then. If she could endure such darkness, surely she could help others find light. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every girl who might face the same nightmare she had escaped. That realization lit a spark within her, growing into an idea that would soon shape her path forward. When she was finally discharged from the hospital, Miss Tutieu returned home to a hero's welcome. Her village had rallied around her story, celebrating her bravery and resilience. People brought gifts, fresh fruits, handmade clothes, and heartfelt notes of encouragement. For someone who had always lived modestly, this outpouring of support felt overwhelming. Yet, amidst the celebrations, she noticed something else, whispers of fear. Many families in the village had daughters, sisters, or nieces who were vulnerable to the same dangers Miss Tutieu had faced. Her ordeal had made them acutely aware of how fragile safety could be. This awareness weighed heavily on Miss Tutieu. She couldn't ignore the fact that her escape didn't mean the problem was solved. The gang responsible for her abduction was still operating somewhere, preying on others. Even worse, there were countless similar groups across the region, thriving, because people were too afraid to speak out. Miss Tutieu knew she couldn't stay silent. If she did, she would be turning her back on those still trapped in the shadows. Her first step was small but meaningful. She started talking to other survivors, women and girls who had endured horrors no one should ever have to face. Through local organizations and community networks, she connected with them, listening to their stories without judgment. Each encounter left her heartbroken yet inspired. These women were fighters, carrying burdens far heavier than most could imagine. Yet they continued to rise each day. Their courage fueled her determination to do more. Miss Tutieu participated in meetings with local leaders, sharing her experiences and urging them to take action. At first, some dismissed her concerns, saying it was a matter for law enforcement, not civilians. But Miss Tutieu persisted, pointing out that change couldn't happen unless everyone worked together. "We can't wait for someone else to fix this," she argued passionately during one meeting. "If we don't protect our own, who will?" Her words resonated with many, especially the younger generation. Teenagers in the village began organizing awareness campaigns, using social media and street performances to spread information about human trafficking and how to stay safe. Miss Tutieu became their mentor, guiding them with wisdom born from experience. Together, they created posters, pamphlets, and workshops aimed at educating communities about the signs of trafficking and how to report suspicious activity. But education alone wasn't enough. Miss Tutieu understood that survivors needed practical support to rebuild their lives. Too often they were left to fend for themselves, battling stigma and poverty with little assistance. Determined to fill this gap, she partnered with a local NGO to establish a shelter for survivors. The shelter offered not only food and medical care, but also vocational training, legal aid, and counseling services. It was a place where women could heal, learn new skills, and regain their independence. Building the shelter wasn't easy. Funding was scarce and skepticism ran high. Some questioned whether such efforts were worth it, arguing that the problem was too big to tackle. Others worried about drawing unwanted attention to the village, but Miss Tutieu remained steadfast. She knocked on doors, appealed to donors, and even organized fundraisers. Slowly but surely the pieces fell into place. When the shelter opened its doors for the first time, it was a moment of triumph, not just for Miss Tutieu, but for everyone who had believed in her vision. The impact was immediate. Women who had nowhere else to turn found refuge and hope within the shelter's walls. One young girl, barely 16, arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a haunted look in her eyes. Over time, she learned tailoring skills at the shelter and began earning money by sewing clothes for villagers. Her confidence grew with each stitch, and soon she was smiling again, a transformation that brought tears to Miss Tutieu's eyes. As word of the shelter spread, so did Miss Tutieu's reputation. People from neighboring towns and cities reached out, asking for advice on how to replicate her model. Journalists wrote articles about her work, amplifying her message to a wider audience. Politicians took notice too, inviting her to speak at conferences and policy discussions. Though she never sought the spotlight, Miss Tutieu embraced these opportunities, knowing they gave her a platform to push for systemic change. Her advocacy extended beyond borders. She collaborated with international organizations working to combat human trafficking, sharing insights from her experiences and learning from theirs. Through these partnerships, she helped draft guidelines for safer migration practices and stricter penalties for traffickers. Her voice became a powerful force in the fight against exploitation, challenging governments and institutions to do better. Despite her growing influence, Miss Tutieu never lost sight of her roots. She returned to her village regularly, checking in on the shelter and spending time with her family. Her parents, once fearful for her safety, now beamed with pride whenever they saw her standing tall, addressing crowds or comforting survivors. They often reminded her of how far she'd come since that fateful night when she disappeared into the jungle. To them, she wasn't just their daughter anymore, she was a symbol of hope and resilience. Yet, Miss Tutieu knew her journey wasn't finished. There were still battles to fight, both personal and collective. Some nights, when sleep eluded her, memories of captivity crept back in, haunting her dreams. On those nights, she reminded herself of why she kept going, for the girls who hadn't escaped, for the ones still hiding in fear, and for the belief that a better world was possible. Every step she took, no matter how difficult, brought her closer to that vision. Miss Tutieu's story was proof that trauma doesn't define a person, it shapes them. Out of unimaginable pain, she had forged a purpose greater than herself. She had transformed her suffering into strength, her loss into leadership, and though the road ahead remained uncertain, she walked it with unwavering resolve, knowing that even the smallest actions could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she might never fully know. For Miss Tutieu, the fight wasn't just about justice, it was about humanity. It was about ensuring that no one else had to endure what she had. And as long as there were people willing to listen, she would keep speaking, keep fighting, and keep believing that change was possible. Miss Tutieu's journey was far from over. If anything, it had only grown more challenging as her efforts to combat human trafficking gained momentum. The shelter she helped build became a beacon of hope for survivors, but running it wasn't easy. Every day brought new struggles, funding shortages, staff burnout, and the constant emotional toll of working with people who had endured unimaginable pain. Yet Miss Tutieu refused to let these obstacles slow her down. She reminded herself daily that every small victory mattered, no matter how insignificant it seemed. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the cracks in the wooden walls of the shelter, Miss Tutieu sat at a rickety table reviewing reports. A young woman named Neela, who had arrived just days earlier, shuffled into the room hesitantly. Her eyes darted around like a frightened bird, unsure where to land. Miss Tutieu smiled warmly, gesturing for her to sit. "How are you feeling today?" she asked softly, her tone inviting trust rather than demanding answers. Neela hesitated before speaking. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything feels broken," Miss Tutieu nodded knowingly. "It's okay to feel that way," she said. "You've been through something no one should ever have to face. But you're here now, and that means you've already taken the hardest step, believing there's a way out." Her words seemed to ease some of the tension in Neela's shoulders. Over the next few weeks, Miss Tutieu worked closely with her, helping her enroll in the shelter's vocational training program. Neela chose embroidery, a skill she remembered fondly from watching her grandmother work when she was a child. At first, her hands trembled too much to thread a needle, but with patience and practice, she began creating intricate patterns. Each stitch seemed to mend not just fabric but also parts of herself. Watching Neela's progress filled Miss Tutieu with a quiet satisfaction. It reinforced her belief that healing wasn't linear, it came in waves, sometimes gentle and other times stormy. And while she celebrated each survivor's victories, she couldn't ignore the larger battle raging outside the shelter's walls. The gang that had abducted her months ago hadn't been completely dismantled. Rumors swirled that they were regrouping, finding new ways to evade capture. This knowledge gnawed at Miss Tutieu, fueling her determination to push for systemic change. Her advocacy took her to cities and towns far beyond her village. She attended conferences, spoke at schools, and met with lawmakers, tirelessly urging them to prioritize the fight against human trafficking. Some listened intently, moved by her story and eager to help. Others dismissed her concerns, claiming the issue was too complex or too costly to address effectively. Those rejections stung, but Miss Tutieu refused to be discouraged. "If we don't act now," she often said during her speeches, "how many more lives will be destroyed?" Her message resonated deeply with young people, especially students who were passionate about social justice. In one university auditorium packed with eager faces, Miss Tutieu shared her experiences candidly. She described the terror of being abducted, the despair of captivity, and the grit it took to escape. When she finished speaking, a young man raised his hand. "What can we do?" he asked earnestly. "We want to help, but we don't know where to start." Miss Tutieu smiled, grateful for the question. "Start by listening," she replied. "Listen to survivors, to activists, to anyone willing to talk about this issue. Educate yourselves and others. Use your voices to demand action from leaders. Even small steps make a difference." Inspired by her words, many students joined forces to organize awareness campaigns. They created videos, wrote articles, and held fundraisers to support shelters like hers. Miss Tutieu marveled at their energy and creativity, realizing that the movement she had started was growing beyond anything she could have imagined. It wasn't just her fight anymore, it belonged to everyone who cared enough to join in. Back in her village, Miss Tutieu continued to nurture the shelter, ensuring it remained a safe haven for those in need. One evening, as she walked through its courtyard, she noticed a group of women gathered under a tree, laughing and chatting animatedly. Among them was Neela, holding up an embroidered scarf proudly. The sight warmed Miss Tutieu's heart, reminding her why she kept going despite the challenges. These women weren't just survivors, they were builders, creators, and dreamers. They were proof that life could bloom even in the harshest conditions. But even as she celebrated these moments of triumph, Miss Tutieu faced setbacks that tested her resolve. Funding for the shelter dried up unexpectedly, forcing her to make difficult decisions about which programs to cut. Supplies dwindled, and staff members grew weary from the relentless workload. During one particularly tough week, she found herself sitting alone in her tiny office, head in her hands, wondering if she had bitten off more than she could chew. Her foam buzzed on the desk, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from a journalist she had met months earlier, informing her that a major donor had expressed interest in supporting the shelter. Relief washed over her, followed by gratitude, not just for the financial lifeline, but for the reminder that she wasn't alone. There were still people willing to stand beside her, even when the road felt impossibly steep. With renewed energy, Miss Tutieu threw herself back into her work. She reached out to local businesses, asking for donations of food, clothing, and materials. She organized community events to raise funds and awareness, bringing villagers together to celebrate resilience and solidarity. Slowly but surely, the shelter stabilized again, thanks to the collective efforts of everyone involved. As time passed, Miss Tutieu began to see glimpses of lasting change. Police raids led to the arrest of several high-ranking members of the gang that had abducted her. Survivors testified bravely in court, their voices shaking but steady as they recounted their ordeals. Laws targeting human trafficking were strengthened, thanks in part to Miss Tutieu's persistent lobbying. Though the fight was far from over, these victories gave her hope that progress was possible. Her own healing journey paralleled the growth of her mission. Therapy sessions helped her process the lingering trauma of her abduction, allowing her to confront memories she had long buried. She learned coping mechanisms to deal with nightmares and flashbacks, finding solace in journaling and meditation. Her family noticed the shift in her demeanor. She laughed more freely, hugged them tighter, and spoke openly about her dreams for the future. One night, as she sat on the porch of her childhood home, gazing at the stars, her mother joined her. "You've come so far," her mother said softly. "I'm proud of you," Mr. paused, considering the weight of those words. "I'm proud of us," she corrected gently. "None of this would have been possible without you, without the village, without everyone who believed in me." Her mother smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You've always been strong," she murmured, "even when you didn't realize it." That strength carried Miss Tutieu forward as she prepared for the next chapter of her journey. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she also knew she had the tools and the community to face them head-on. What had once been a personal quest for survival had transformed into a lifelong commitment to justice and compassion, and though she understood that true victory would require generations of effort, she took comfort in knowing she was planting seeds of change, seeds that would grow into trees offering shade and shelter to countless others. For Miss Tutieu, that was enough. It had to be. Because every life saved, every voice empowered, and every heart healed was a testament to the power of hope and to the unyielding spirit of those who refused to give up. Years had passed since Miss Tutieu's escape from the gang that sought to destroy her. The scars of her ordeal, both visible and invisible, still lingered, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as reminders of how far she had come in the countless lives she had touched along the way. Her journey, which began in fear and despair, had transformed into a movement that inspired thousands. Yet, for all the progress she had made, there were moments when she paused to reflect on where it all started. One crisp morning, as sunlight filtered through the thick canopy of trees surrounding her village, Miss Tutieu stood at the edge of a newly built community center. It was modest, with walls painted bright yellow and a sign above the entrance reading, "A safe space for all." This center was her latest project, a place where survivors could gather, share their stories, and find resources to rebuild their lives. Inside, women learned skills like sewing, cooking, and bookkeeping, while children played in a small courtyard. Filled with laughter, Miss Tutieu walked through the bustling rooms, stopping occasionally to chat with the people who had become part of her extended family. She greeted Neela, now a confident young woman teaching embroidery classes to younger girls. "You're doing amazing work," Miss Tutieu told her with a proud smile. Neela blushed but nodded, her hands steady as she guided a student through a tricky stitch. Watching her thrive brought immense satisfaction to Miss Tutieu. It was proof that healing wasn't just possible. It was powerful. Later that day, Miss Tutieu traveled to a nearby city to speak at a national summit on human trafficking. The event drew activists, policymakers, and survivors from across the country, all united by a shared goal: to end exploitation once and for all. As she stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. For a moment she felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. But then she remembered why she was there, not for herself, but for everyone who couldn't speak. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "When I was taken, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never see my family again, never feel safe, never dream of anything beyond survival. But here I am, alive and fighting, not just for myself, but for others who deserve the same chance." Her words resonated deeply with the audience. She spoke about the horrors she endured, the isolation, the threats, the constant fear, but also about the resilience she discovered within herself. She described her escape, not as an act of heroism, but as a desperate bid for freedom fueled by hope. And she emphasized the importance of community, sharing how the kindness of strangers saved her life and shaped her mission. By the time she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. People approached her afterward, thanking her for her courage and asking how they could contribute to the cause. A young activist handed her a notebook filled with ideas for grassroots campaigns. An elderly man pressed a folded letter into her hand, promising financial support for her shelter. Each interaction reminded her that change didn't happen alone, it required collective effort, compassion, and determination. The summit marked a turning point in Miss Tuteu's advocacy. Her speech went viral, reaching audiences far beyond her own country. Journalists interviewed her, filmmakers documented her story, and organizations invited her to collaborate on global initiatives. Suddenly, her name became synonymous with resilience and action. While some might have been intimidated by the attention, Miss Tutieu embraced it as an opportunity to amplify her message. She knew the fight against human trafficking needed voices loud enough to break through indifference, but fame came with its own challenges. Some criticized her methods, accusing her of oversimplifying complex issues or seeking personal glory. Others dismissed her efforts altogether, claiming systemic problems couldn't be solved by grassroots movements. These criticisms weighed on her, especially during late nights when exhaustion clouded her thoughts. Yet, instead of letting them discourage her, she used them as fuel to improve. She listened to feedback, adapted her strategies, and continued. Learning from other advocates around the world, back home, Miss Tutieu remained grounded in the everyday realities of her work. She visited the shelter regularly, checking in on residents and ensuring they had everything they needed. One evening, as she sat with a group of women sharing dinner under the stars, one of them asked, "Do you ever get tired of this?" "Of always having to fight?" Miss Tutieu thought for a moment before answering. "Yes," she admitted honestly. "There are days when I wonder if what we're doing makes any difference. But then I look around and see all of you strong, brave, and rebuilding your lives, and I know it does. Every step forward matters, no matter how small." Her honesty earned nods of understanding from the group. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were leaders in their own right, using their experiences to guide others. Together, they formed a network of support that stretched far beyond the shelter's walls. Women who had once been silenced by trauma now spoke boldly, sharing their stories to educate communities and hold perpetrators accountable. As months turned into years, Miss Tutieu partnered with international organizations to expand her reach. She traveled to countries grappling with similar crises, offering advice based on her experiences and learning from theirs. In one remote village, she met a group of teenage girls running workshops to teach peers about online safety, a growing concern as traffickers increasingly exploited digital platforms. Inspired by their initiative, she helped secure funding for their program and connected them with mentors worldwide. Through these collaborations, Miss Tutieu realized that the fight against human trafficking wasn't confined to any single region or culture. It was a global issue requiring diverse solutions tailored to local contexts. Her approach evolved accordingly, focusing not only on rescue and rehabilitation but also on prevention and policy reform. She lobbied governments to strengthen laws protecting vulnerable populations, worked with tech companies to combat online exploitation, and supported educational programs aimed at empowering marginalized communities. Despite her achievements, Miss Tutieu never lost sight of her roots. She returned to her village often, finding solace in its simplicity and warmth. Her parents, now older, watched with pride as their daughter continued to inspire change. "You've grown so much," her father said one evening as they sat together by the fire. "But you're still the same person who used to run barefoot through these fields." His words brought tears to her eyes. No matter how much her life had changed, she carried pieces of her childhood with her love for her family, her connection to the land, and her belief in the goodness of people. These anchors kept her grounded, reminding her that even the grandest dreams began with small, humble steps. In the final years of her active advocacy, Miss Tutieu focused on mentoring the next generation of leaders. She established a fellowship program for young activists, providing them with training, resources, and opportunities to make an impact. Among the fellows was a spirited teenager named Rena, whose passion for justice reminded Miss Tutieu of her younger self. Under her guidance, Rena launched a campaign to educate rural schools about trafficking risks, reaching thousands of students and earning recognition from local authorities. Watching Rena succeed filled Miss Tutieu with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about passing the torch, it was about knowing that the movement would continue long after she stepped back. When she finally retired from public life, choosing to spend more time with her family and focus on quieter pursuits, she did so with peace in her heart. The seeds she had planted were thriving, nurtured by countless hands eager to carry the work forward. Today, Miss Tutieu's legacy lives on not just in the shelters, centers, and policies she helped create, but in the hearts of those she inspired. Survivors turned leaders continue to advocate for justice, armed with the lessons she taught them. Villagers still gather under starlit skies to share stories of resilience and hope, many of which begin with her name. And though she prefers to stay out of the spotlight now, her presence is felt everywhere her work has touched. For Miss Tutieu, the greatest reward isn't fame or accolades, it's knowing that she played a role in making the world safer for future generations. Her journey proves that even in the darkest moments, light can emerge. That pain can transform into purpose, and that one person's courage can spark a ripple effect capable of changing lives forever.